In 2015, director Colin Trevorrow was on top of the world. Practically overnight, he resurrected the Jurassic Park franchise with Jurassic World, which, at the time, became the third highest grossing movie ever made. As you would expect, that kind of success put Trevorrow on the radar of every major studio in Hollywood, including Lucasfilm, who hired him to write and direct the final installment of their Star Wars sequel trilogy. Unfortunately for Trevorrow, his next movie was The Book of Henry, a movie that was a massive failure that was hated by critics, mocked by audiences, and considered so bad that Lucasfilm fired him soon afterwards, which in turn caused all his other career prospects to dry up quickly and resulted in his final movie to date being this. So, what was so bad about The Book of Henry that it flushed this man's career down the toilet? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. So, sit back, relax, and try not to stare too hard, folks, as we take a spoiler-heavy look at The Book of Henry. But before we do that, if you could help me get to 3,000 subscribers by pressing the subscribe button, I'd really appreciate it. Anyway, here we go. So, The Book of Henry is the heartwarming story of the Carpenter family, a mother and her two sons who live in the small town of Calvary, New York, a place where the neighbors are friendly, the scenery is beautiful, and for some reason it's always fall. There's Susan, a single mother who works at a diner, loves playing video games, and is probably an alcoholic, her 9-year-old son Peter, and her 11-year-old son Henry. As the movie begins, we get a look into their everyday struggles, living in a large house on a nice suburban street with plenty of food, comfortable beds, and a massive treehouse in the scenic woods behind their home. How is it possible that a single woman who only works part-time and supports 2 children afford to live in such a large house? Well, no one seems to know.
Nice neighborhood you live in. I always figured you for an apartment somewhere.
Not even Susan. In fact, despite her quality of life, she seems to think that she's poor. So much so that she's always joking with her best friend Sheila about being broke.
I had to move money into my Swiss bank account, and the rates are terrible.
When I won the lottery, you should have seen the taxes.
And yes, just in case you're wondering, Sheila is being played by Sarah Silverman. For those of you unfamiliar with her work, she's a comedian most famous for her work in the African American community.
Boop, 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 boop.
As it turns out, the Carpenters are so financially stable because of Henry. You see, he's no ordinary 11-year-old, he's a genius, with PhD-level knowledge of engineering and finance, and because of this, he's able to make lots of money by buying and selling stocks on the payphone at his school. So, every day for Susan, Peter, and Henry is pretty much the same. The boys go to school, the teachers marvel at how great Henry is, and Susan struggles to do the simplest tasks.
Sorry, I'm late.
Needing Henry to handle the finances, help with the shopping, and even basic parenting.
Don't curse in front of people.
Like it matters anymore.
Typically, for the type of movie that this movie wants to be, the mother is the cornerstone of the family, who's able to tackle all the challenges of single motherhood despite the struggles that come along with it. And as those movies progress, the single mother is able to learn various lessons by seeing the world from her child's perspective. However, in this movie, Susan is a hapless nitwit who can't seem to get her paycheck directly deposited into her bank account without first consulting Henry.
I guess I could just set you up with direct deposit if that's easier.
I'll have to ask Henry.
Anyway, living next door to the Carpenters is Glenn Sickelman, a name that you won't forget because the movie won't let you.
It's Glenn.
Mr. Sickelman.
Glenn.
Mr. Sickelman.
Glenn.
Mr. Sickelman. Sickelman. Glenn.
Mr. Sickelman.
And his daughter, Christina, who seems to have a very close relationship with the Carpenters, so much so that by simply noticing that Christina is sad one day at school, Henry knows that something must be terribly wrong with her home life. And by being kept awake by a plot-relevant headache, Henry's suspicions are confirmed, as he sees Christina being abused by Glenn. So, the next morning, Henry jumps into action to ensure that this never happens again.
God damn it, Janice, how much longer does this have to go on?
Hold on a second. If this abuse has been going on for a while, then why is the movie presenting it as a revelation? Up until this moment, there has been not even the slightest hint that Christina has been abused. despite the fact that Henry is dumping a ton of new information on the audience.
Bruises, exhaustion, decreased school performance. What else do you need to see?
The movie is framing this as something new, not something that Henry has been observing and reporting for some time. From the audience's perspective, Henry witnessing Christina being abused by Glenn is the movie's inciting incident, and should have been introduced much sooner. I mean, if you're going to have Henry get so mad about Christina being abused that he's going to practically kick in the principal's office door like an angry police captain in an 80s action movie.
Your approach to this whole goddamn case bothers me.
You're a goddamn idiot.
Where the fuck you been?
God damn it, Janice.
Then we should have seen that he's been driven to stop this from happening from the very start of the film, not 20 minutes into it. And deciding to have this moment so late in the movie's runtime has caused a tonal whiplash within the movie that it's never going to recover from.
God damn it, Janice.
Henry then decides to take matters into his own hands by making an anonymous call to Child Protective Services. There's just one small problem. The director of social services is Glenn's brother, George, which means that no further investigations will be conducted, which of course wouldn't be the case in reality, but we'll get into more of that a little later on. So, after concluding that all other options have been exhausted, Henry decides to do what anyone in this situation would do and begins planning to murder Glenn. Which may seem like a shock at first, but if you've been paying attention to the movie, then you would have noticed that this was always Henry's true character. It was just a matter of time until it came out.
Violence isn't the worst thing in the world.
Violence isn't the worst thing in the world. Violence isn't the worst thing in the world.
So, here's a question for you. Have you ever wanted to know what it would look like to watch a child plan an execution while whimsical music plays in the background? Well, I hope so, because that's exactly what happens next, as we see Henry carefully prepare himself to commit a capital crime. Studying the latest techniques in forensic science, planning where the murder will take place, and even how to dispose of the murder weapon. And speaking of the murder weapon, Henry's plan on how to acquire it is so dumb that it almost demands that we take a closer look at it. So, let's take a moment to do so. Like any good American, Henry knows the best way to kill someone is with a gun. But unfortunately for Henry, there are two things preventing him from getting one. The first being that he lives in New York, a state with very strict gun laws, and second, he's a child. Still, despite this, Henry decides to sneak into a local gun store, where, by pure coincidence, an illegal gun purchase is taking place, where the buyer just so happens to say the name of his contact, Dominic, loudly enough for Henry to hear. Now, did Henry follow this man into the store on purpose? No. Did Henry know that this illegal purchase was going to happen? Also, no. Then why did he sneak into this gun store when he had no prior knowledge that illegal guns could be purchased from it? I don't know. He just does. And luckily for him, it all works out. Henry now knows that guns can be illegally purchased from this store under minimal surveillance from a gun shop owner who will ask no questions as long as the name Dominic is referenced when making the purchase. Essentially, Henry figures out how to get a gun thanks to a series of contrivances that just so happen to work because the plot needs them to work. It's so poorly written and so incredibly stupid that it should be taught in schools as an example of how to not write a movie.
So remember, guns don't kill people. Dangerous minorities do.
Anyway, Henry has brain cancer. As it turns out, all those headaches he's been having lately are the result of a massive brain tumor that's been pressing on his brain, which means that Henry only has a few days left to live. Now, if you haven't seen this movie, then you're probably thinking that I've skipped over a whole lot of information in order to get to this point. After all, just a moment ago, Henry was planning to kill a man, and now he's in the hospital just a few days away from death. Again, it's more of that tonal whiplash I mentioned earlier when this happened.
God damn it, Janice.
And while everyone is sad that Henry is dying, I personally can't help but feel a sense of relief. I mean, as soon as his first attempt in getting help for Christina failed, he immediately concluded that executing a man in his backyard with a high-powered rifle was the only alternative. In the long run, I personally think that society was saved from a serial killer in the making. So, Henry dies and everyone is sad. And we know this because everything that was once bright and colorful is now dark and gray. Susan, understandably, isn't doing very well. She's on the verge of a mental breakdown, she started smoking, and she's struggling at work. But luckily for Susan, she has just been informed by her boss that she has nearly $700,000 sitting in a bank account with even more money tied up in stocks and bonds. Now, how does her boss know this? Because Henry sent him a letter explaining it.
He says you have like $680K in a checking account, even more in stocks and bonds.
Which immediately raises a few questions. Like, why didn't Henry just tell Susan about this himself? And more importantly, how is Henry opening all these bank accounts? For those of you unfamiliar, opening a bank account enters one into a contract with that bank. Because of this, minors can't open a bank account without a parent because minors can't consent to the terms of a contract. The only way Henry would be able to open this account is with his mother's help. Or Henry has all of Susan's information and has been committing identity theft for years.
Identity theft is not a joke.
Anyway, then this happens.
Mom! Mom!
Yeah?
I think Henry wants us to kill Glenn.
Seeing that Christina is still visibly upset, Peter remembers that Henry wanted him to make sure that Susan read his notebook. When she finally does, it's revealed that Henry didn't just spend his final days making sure that his family finances were in order, he also devoted a large amount of time to laying out in painstaking detail why Susan must now take up his mission to murder Glenn in order to save Christina from his abuse, which causes Susan to question why Henry would think that Glenn has been abusive. After all, she and Christina are so close that they have a secret handshake. So you would think that if Glenn was abusing Christina, Susan would be the one to know about it. So Susan decides to take these allegations to the proper authorities, despite the fact that Henry has explained why that won't work. And once again, it turns out Henry is right, as Susan is turned away and her concerns are dismissed at every turn. So now we need to pause and examine the central flaw in this premise the movie is asking us to accept. That because Glenn is the police commissioner and his brother George is the county's director of social services, any report that's made against Glenn would be ignored. To understand just how flawed this idea really is, we need to break down how a CPS report actually works. In the state of New York, when an anonymous CPS call is made, it goes to a statewide central register, or an SCR. There, the SCR's intake worker's job is to then determine if the information provided meets the statutory criteria for abuse. In this case, an allegation of sexual abuse by a parent definitely meets that threshold. It's important to note that the intake workers have no discretion in this process. There is no way that an intake worker can simply ignore or discard a qualifying report, regardless of who the accused party is. In reality, because Glenn's brother George is the county's director of social services, his case would trigger a conflict of interest escalation, meaning that the state oversight body would reassign the case to a neighboring county and state police would assist in the investigation to ensure that evidence is properly collected and that Glenn could not use his position to intimidate or influence anyone involved. And the state would then determine the appropriate next steps. In short, a CPS report filed against a sitting police commissioner would be treated as a high-profile case, subject to additional oversight. Now, that's not to say that in real life, CPS cases never fall through the cracks. They certainly do, and I'm not denying that possibility. However, the problem is that the movie doesn't earn this. We're never shown why the multiple safeguards that are built into the Child Protective Services system fail in this specific case. They just do because the plot needs them to. If the movie is going to expect the audience to feel that killing Glenn is the only way to help Christina, then it has to do the work in showing why that's the only option. The Book of Henry doesn't do any of that work at all. And just like everything else in the movie so far, we're just presented with it as fact and then expected to move on. And if it seems strange that I've spent several minutes explaining how a CPS report actually works, then it should also be noted that I've done more research pointing out the failures of this movie's script than the writers did when making this movie. And all it took was a simple Google search.
What is Google?
Google? How does Google work? A few nights later, after putting Peter to bed, Susan, just as Henry did, sees Christina being abused from a bedroom window, and also, just like Henry, has decided that murder is the only option. But Adam, you ask? Susan, so far, has been shown to struggle with handling even the simplest of tasks. How could she possibly carry out an assassination plot? Well, I'm glad you asked. As it turns out, Henry also spent his last few days on Earth leaving detailed instructions on a tape recorder that are so easy to follow, even a child, or in this case Susan, would be able to kill Glenn without any problems.
My milkshake brings all the boys to the yard, and their life is better than yours.
Henry wasn't just an engineering and financial genius, he was also apparently an expert in ballistics. Because of this vast knowledge, he knows all the things Susan will need to make the murder of Glenn possible. The first of which is knowing that by going to the gun store that we saw earlier and pretending to be an associate of Dominic, that the cost of the gun needed to kill Glenn would only be $1,500.
I need a Nemesis Vanquish 7.62 with a Litton Ranger, night vision scope, a suppressor, and 3 extra 10-round detachable mags.
How could Henry possibly know this when Susan is going to be buying a gun illegally and therefore would probably be more expensive because of the added risk to the seller? We don't know, he just does. So now, Susan, a woman who has never fired a gun before, will take pre-recorded lessons from her dead 11-year-old son, who has also never shot a gun before, on how to properly shoot a gun.
Slow, steady pressure on the trigger.
I'm here.
And just like that, Susan is now ready to brutally murder a man in cold blood. But before she can do that, some more preparation has to be done so that the plan can be executed without any issues. What exactly is that plan? Well, buckle up, folks, because if you thought the movie was done before, you haven't seen anything yet. On the night of the school talent show, Susan will go to the talent show and make sure that she's seen by enough people to have a solid alibi. Then, as the show starts, she will sneak out the back and go back to her home, making sure to get back within 45 minutes so no one will notice that she's gone. Then, she'll use a walkie-talkie that's plugged into an amplifier to lure Glenn into the woods where he will be shot in the head from the safety of Henry's treehouse. Thanks to gravity and the force of the bullet hitting Glenn, his body will then fall into a nearby river and washed away in the current. Susan will then throw the gun off this bridge and make it back in time to the talent show to catch Peter's magic trick. And finally, Susan will become Christina's legal guardian because she forged Glenn's signature by copying it from a permission slip that he signed, allowing Christina to be part of the talent show.
Right.
Now, at first glance, it would appear that Henry has lived up to his old mantra,
You have to build in a fail-safe, covering every contingency.
in order to make sure that Susan is able to get away with murder. Of course, he could have spent some of this energy finding actual evidence that Glenn has been abusing Christina and reporting it to the proper authorities, but I suppose an elaborate murder plot is just as good. However, once you look past the ridiculous idea that a middle-aged woman is planning to kill a man because her dead 11-year-old son has convinced her to do so by having read his journal, it becomes clear that Henry hasn't planned for any contingencies at all. What if the gun store clerk decides to not sell the gun to Susan? What if there were more cameras in the store that Henry didn't see and therefore didn't account for in his notes, causing Susan to step directly into the line of sight of a hidden camera while she's purchasing an illegal firearm? What if someone saw her leave the talent show? What if, when speeding back to her house to kill Glenn, she ran a red light and was stopped by the cops or hit another car?
Stupid women drivers!
According to Henry's instructions, Glenn has to be killed on the night of the talent show. But if any of these things happen, Susan won't be able to kill Glenn that night. So what is she supposed to do? Just wait for another talent show? Furthermore, assuming Glenn does go into the woods as planned and Susan kills him, then what? According to Henry's plan, the force of the bullet should cause Glenn to fall into a nearby creek where his body would be washed away by the current. However, as you can see, the deepest this creek gets is 3 feet. In fact, most of the time, it seems to be completely dry, which means that Glenn's body would surely be found. And finally, if Susan is able to lure Glenn in the woods with the walkie-talkie, takes a shot at him and misses, then what happens to her? More than likely, she would either be arrested for attempted murder or killed by Glenn in self-defense. The scenarios that I've just outlined are only a few of the obvious ways that this plan could go wrong, yet Henry provides Susan with no alternatives to account for any of them. You see, the story proceeds as if this plan's success is a foregone conclusion, which is why Susan is able to go from doubting that Glenn is abusing Christina to training to be his assassin in the span of just a few days. At no point does the film meaningfully earn this escalation, and the audience is asked to just accept that the plan will work, not because it's been tested against complications or grounded in any believable decision-making, but simply because the script insists that Henry's brilliance can never be questioned. As a result, the murder plot doesn't feel like the outcome of escalating circumstances, but rather a pre-selected destination reached through the stripping away of cause and effect and replacing them with contrivance, convenience, and coincidence.
So I feel like this story's been living inside me for 18 years.
So now, the night that Susan has been planning for has finally arrived. The night of the talent show, where she will also be killing Glenn. Some kids are dancing, other kids are singing, and some kids are doing whatever this is.
Me, I kick you in the knees. I'm the baddest, meanest, mad dog mother you're ever gonna see. Blink twice and miss me. Six they try to kiss me. Seconds they see me.
Meanwhile, everything for Susan is going according to plan. Glenn has been lured into the woods to investigate the noise made by the walkie-talkie that has been taped to a tree, and Susan lays in wait for the right moment to turn Glenn's head into this watermelon. Then, suddenly, Susan decides to not go through with it. Why? Well, because Henry's Rube Goldberg machine that he had been working on earlier in the movie randomly goes off, causing a chain reaction of events that eventually lead to Susan seeing a collage of photos of herself, Peter, and Henry together. And because of this, she concludes that she can't kill Glenn just because Henry wants her to, because Henry is a child, not an adult.
You're just a child.
Honestly, it's so stupid that it kind of renders one speechless. I mean, you would think that the realization that her son was willing to plan out and possibly commit murder without a second thought would have been enough for Susan to question the rationality of this plan to begin with. But it didn't, because the movie was written by an idiot. So now, suffering from an extreme case of mental clarity, Susan leaves the treehouse and attempts to sneak out of the woods without being seen when she's confronted by Glenn. And it's here that she unloads some more information that the audience needs to know.
Emergency room visits. School absences. Henry documented all of it, and you never even knew he was watching.
Wait a second. Emergency room trips? School absences? Since when? So far, all that we've been told is that Christina has come to school with some bruises, but suddenly now she's been going to the emergency room? Furthermore, it doesn't seem that Henry has been documenting anything, but rather he's been too focused on killing Glenn. And if he did have evidence that Susan was aware of, then she should have taken that directly to the police. And for those of you saying that the police would protect Glenn, she could have just as easily gone to the state police, who are not under the purview of Glenn's authority. But she didn't, because she, an adult, has the mind of a child that can easily be manipulated by actual children. Honestly, at this point, it would appear that Henry's death was the best possible thing that could have happened to Susan, because if he was still alive, she would never have this grand revelation that she should stop being so stupid. And it's obvious to me that if God hadn't seen fit to strike Henry down before he could grow up to be a mass murderer, Susan would have spent the rest of her life living in a haze of stupidity.
Set you up with direct deposit if that's easier.
I'll have to ask Henry.
Anyway, as Susan runs off to dispose of her would-be murder weapon and make it back in time to the talent show for Peter's magic trick, the police are on the way to arrest Glenn. Why? Well, because after seeing Christina's ballet dance at the talent show, the principal decides that Christina has been abused after all and calls the police. So by now you're probably asking yourself, didn't the principal and Henry discuss the fact that Christina was coming to school with bruises?
Bruises, exhaustion, decreased school performance. What else do you need to see?
So why wasn't that enough for her to call the police, but seeing this dance was? Well, I'm not sure, and honestly, at this point, I really don't care.
God damn it, Janice.
So anyway, Glenn decides to kill himself, which means that Christina can go live with Susan and Peter, and Susan gets to live happily ever after with a bank account full of money, a new stepdaughter, and completely free of the consequences of trying to kill a man. And that's it. It's over. Thank God. I hate this movie. When I was first told about this movie, I thought the person explaining it to me was exaggerating about how bad it actually is. But now that I've seen it, I can honestly say that they undersold its terribleness. It's a dull, poorly paced, contrivance-heavy mess of a film that features some of the most two-dimensional, poorly written characters that you'll ever see on screen. Even Christina, whose salvation from Glenn as the plot of the entire movie, is written as nothing more than a prop, so much so that you could replace her with literally anything, a rubber duck, a bag of trash, or even Fred Durst, and literally nothing about the movie would change. She exists solely as an excuse to kill Glenn. Honestly, it's hard to believe that the man who wrote this movie spent 18 years working on it before it got made. You'd think that a script that took over 4 times as long to write as it did for the Golden Gate Bridge to be built would be a lot better, and the fact that it isn't is actually kind of embarrassing. If you see the behind-the-scenes footage of this movie, it's obvious that director Colin Trevorrow and writer Greg Hurwitz seem to believe that they've made something that's profound, when in fact, nothing could be further from the truth. This movie isn't just bad, it's one of the most poorly written films from a major studio that I've seen in a very long time, standing shoulder to shoulder with the likes of Madam Web. Or, to put it bluntly, the Book of Henry is
one big pile of shit.
God damn it, Janice.